The matchup is set with Miami taking on the Boston Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals. So, to get you ready for that matchup, we'll be answering questions on how Miami will handle a challenge. Everything you need to know, from rotations to individual matchups to trying to avoid foul trouble, everything to get you ready as Miami takes on the Boston Celtics on today's playoff edition of Locked On Heat.
Are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Heat Nation. It's a Monday edition of Locked On Heat, your daily podcast covering all things Miami Heat, however you may be listening or watching on YouTube, Odyssey, or on your favorite podcast app. Thank you so much for making us your first listen every day. I'm David Ramil, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Wes Goldberg. We'd like to thank today's sponsor of Locked On Heat, Sakara Nutrition. Sakara is a wellness company anchored in food as medicine on a mission to nourish. So go to sakara.com/lockedon20 and enter the code LOCKEDON20 for 20% off at checkout. The Miami Heat will kick off their Eastern Conference Finals rematch versus the Boston Celtics on Tuesday. Of course, these two teams met under similar circumstances in the Orlando bubble just 2 seasons ago. And while the core of both teams is fairly similar, there have been changes as well. And so we've got questions about the matchup. On today's show, it'll be a little different. Wes and I will be asking each other key questions about Miami's ability to beat the Celtics and move on to the finals berth. So let's get right into it. Go ahead, Wes. I think you've got your first question lined up.
I think the biggest one is who comes to the aid of Jimmy Butler from a scoring perspective for the Miami Heat? Because Jimmy Butler, we've talked about this, one of the best players in the playoffs so far. The rest of the Miami Heat, he has led the Heat offense, but has not gotten a whole lot of help, right? They needed big games from Max, like 20 points from Max Strus in that closeout game against Philadelphia. You know, we saw Tyler Herro have big games in round one, Bam Adebayo here and there in both rounds until Joel Embiid became a factor. But that's just not going to work in this series. Against the Celtics, with this level of defense, this will be the best defense the Heat have played in these playoffs this entire season. This is the best, most engaged, most urgent defense the Heat will be facing. They need somebody to step up. Outside of Jimmy Butler, who, again, has been phenomenal in these playoffs, averaging 28 points per game. Bam is averaging 14.6. Tyler Herro, 13.8. Max Strus, 12.5. Victor Oladipo, an 11.4. And Strus and Depot in fewer minutes than Bam and Tyler Herro. But they need somebody else to step up. I'm not sure who I expect it to be. I think I know who I want it to be. I think they really need Tyler Herro to have a really big series.
Interesting. It's funny because the irony here is that while Boston wound up advancing fairly handily against the Bucks, I think the Bucks would have been a better matchup for Herro based on that drop coverage with Brook Lopez. They would concede the mid-range space, and that's where Tyler loves to operate. He would certainly have put up some pretty big numbers, not to mention the fact, again, the hometown team and all that could, plays into his mindset when he approaches the series. Boston, certainly a much more switch-heavy defense, a much better defense, although Milwaukee's defense is still pretty good. So it'll be less likely, at least in my opinion, that Tyler gets those points going on. To me, when you're looking at which player I think is most likely to step up, and I think it's one also that a lot of Heat fans would want him to be the guy to step up, it's Bam. I think he's not going to have his hands full with the same defensive matchup. He doesn't have to exert so much on that role. And even when he does, that's not really an excuse. He guarded Embiid as well as anybody can in today's NBA. And despite all that, he did look more aggressive from a scoring perspective. He did just enough. And look, to Eric Spoelstra's frequent criticism of you and point in general, it doesn't matter what he does on the floor as far as the scoring is concerned. He impacts the game in so many other ways, etc. But we've seen a much more offensive-minded version of Bam against these Celtics, and I think we'll continue to do so in the series. I think he's going to have a little bit more energy because Al Horford, not really a huge threat. He does get involved in a lot of their actions. He does space the floor, obviously, and he did have that big fourth quarter against the Bucks to save the game. But despite all that, I don't think he's going to be the same kind of factor, certainly not to the same level as even an injured version of Joel Embiid.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Like, Bam has already faced probably his toughest test, at least in this conference, right? Or, even if the Heat were to get to the NBA Finals, Bam's already played his toughest test, even with Joel Embiid being hurt. That's more of a
Right.
credit to Joel Embiid than anything else. Like the way that
Absolutely.
he had to front him and how much energy he had to work and use on defense really did limit him offensively. I don't think that'll be the case in Boston, and nothing against Al Horford or Daniel
Right.
Tice or whoever, but
Right.
those aren't the same problems, right? You're not working your butt off, 24 seconds every shot clock to prevent Al Horford or Daniel Tice or Rob Williams from getting the ball, right? You
Right.
let them get the ball and you do your thing and you play defense, but it's just more normal. I do think I'm with you. You look at the matchups here. I think this is the series where Bam can be more of an offensive factor. And we saw him be such a defensive difference maker 2 years ago against the Celtics in the conference finals. There's an opportunity for Bam to really lay it out here. And I'll go back to, my story earlier in the season when Bam really sort of made the mental change to be more aggressive offensively. It was after a blowout loss to the Boston Celtics where Caleb Martin
Yeah.
attempted more shots. This Celtics matchup has been a meaningful one throughout his career, not just this season, but like I said, 2 years ago in the conference finals where he really came alive with the block on Tatum. I expect Bam to get up for this series in that way that Heat fans want him. To your point, they've always wanted him to be there. Al Horford was awesome on Giannis all series long. They've got depth there, they've got guys there, but I do think that Bam is better than all of them, and he needs to prove it in this
Yeah.
series, offensively and defensively. To go back to Tyler Hero really quick.
Well, I was just gonna say, if I'm a Lake Allen, I would just show nothing but that replay of that terrible game that Bam had, where he, it kind of spurred him to be the more aggressive version that we
Yeah.
saw for most of the season.
And in terms of Tyler Hero, I do think there will be opportunities there.
Mhm.
It'll be interesting to see if Boston blitzes him the same way that Philly did. I know that they like to switch everything, but they like to have a guy on everybody as well. It'll be interesting to see how aggressive they are.
Yeah.
I know that Eric Spoelstra says a lot about Tyler Hero, like, hey, it's a credit, it's a show of respect to Tyler Hero that they're blitzing him. I think yes, partly, but also part of it is that he has a really hard time passing out of those switches, especially when he's getting size put on him from multiple directions. And Boston has the size to do that the way that we've seen teams like Toronto and Philadelphia do in the past. I wonder if they'll do that or play it a little bit more conservative and keep it, man to
I
man
don't
for the
know.
most part against those other guys. It'll be an
It's a tough
interesting thing to
matchup.
see. Yeah.
It's tough because they bring Derek White off the bench as
Yeah.
a primary defender, et cetera. A guy who handled Giannis on occasion. He did a pretty good job on the Bucks guards. I mean, he's going to be on him completely. Like he'll go into the game, probably check his minutes exactly the way Matisse Thybulle did against the with the Sixers too. Like
Yeah.
as soon as Tyler comes to the game, Derek
him
White
in.
will probably go in there, put him in there, just save him to be like the guy who isolates himself completely. Because the
Yeah.
Celtics aren't counting on White scoring the same way Miami could use Tyler scoring, and so he can just exert himself completely, just lay it all out there, try and shut Tyler down. And Tyler's up for the matchup certainly, but he has struggled, so he's
I
going to have
think
to get
Tyler
those
can
opportunities.
take a guy on one-on-one. I have no it's when you start doubling him, like,
Yeah.
and to your point, like that's a really good comparison, the Derek White thing to Matisse Thybulle. I know that Derek White's had a couple of nice games in this series for Boston shooting wise, but overall you're
Yeah.
not really worried about him
Right.
offensively, and I think that you can kind of put Tyler on him the way that you put Tyler on Matisse Thybulle and not really worry about that being exploited defensively. So it's a good comp by you. I think Tyler Hero is so good off the dribble with that first step, using that strength, getting into his bag of moves in that mid range. I thought it was interesting that Boston gave up a lot of mid range opportunities to Giannis and the
Yeah.
Bucks, but that was mostly because that was by design. They wanted to
Yeah.
give up those shots because they just didn't want him to get to the rim. But Miami is also really good at getting to the rim. They don't have a singular guy the way that they like the Bucks have Giannis, but they do have Jimmy Butler. They do have Bam Adebayo. They do thrive at getting to the basket. We saw Philadelphia try to take that away and kind of build a wall in front of those guys. I wonder if Boston will do that too, and then kind of systematically give up those mid-range looks to a guy like Tyler Hero, who we know is so good in that spot on the
Yeah.
floor. I don't know. It's a really interesting thing. If they want to play it conservatively with Tyler, I think he could have a big series. If they do start to double him and blitz him off of screens, it could be hard for him. But to come back to the Bam Adebayo point, regardless, he's going to have a huge series. In addition to Jimmy Butler, obviously, that goes without saying. Jimmy has to be toe-to-toe with Jayson Tatum, scoring-wise. But Bam Adebayo, I think, has to have the really big series, too. Not just to make sure that they get enough points on the board, but to get, take the pressure off of guys like Tyler and all these other guys, too.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned Jimmy because I mean we discussed this and debated it in the last series against the Sixers whether or not he'd have to continue this 40 points per game type scoring, and the answer is yes. Like we saw that happen and play out versus the Bucks, where
Has to.
Giannis put up these monster games just to be able to keep pace with what Tatum can go off for. Like Tatum is that good a player and has been throughout the playoffs. So
and without
definitely a good
Middleton, the Bucks didn't have that second guy. So another point, like this is the central question. It's why we lead off with this one. You need somebody to consistently be there for Jimmy Butler.
Well, he wasn't as much of a factor against the Sixers as you'd like, and though we're running long, I think we have time for another quick question. Can the Miami Heat win versus Boston without Kyle Lowry at practice today? As you mentioned, no updates on his health. I know a lot of Heat fans, are pretty confident in what Gabe Vincent can bring to the table. But while I think Lowry would have been more essential to Miami's chances of winning against the Milwaukee Bucks because he would have matched up directly with Drew Holiday, who we saw change everything in Milwaukee's favor last season when the two teams met in the playoffs against the Celtics. Is Lowry as essential a piece going forward? Is he a key component of them being able to win against Boston?
Well, I'm going to answer the first way you asked it. Can they win without Kyle Lowry? And I'm going to keep it short here because I know we're up against the break, but no, they need Kyle Lowry to win the series. They cannot win the series without Kyle Lowry. This is a series that's going to come down to the margins. If the Heat are going to win the series, it takes somebody stepping up from a scoring-wise next to Jimmy Butler, but they are going to need to be opportunistic in a way that only Kyle Lowry unlocks those opportunities for Miami when it comes to those hit-ahead passes and all those things, exploiting mismatches. This is going to be such a high IQ basketball series that's going to be won on those margins.
Yeah.
Love Gabe Vincent, everything he brought, but he ain't Kyle Lowry when it comes to those margin winning type of things, those skills. That's why you brought Kyle Lowry. You added a guy like Kyle Lowry and his championship experience to get to the finals. I have a really hard time seeing Miami doing it without Kyle Lowry, which is why, by the way, after one game, they brought him back and he was clearly not 100%. That's why they shut him down for the rest of the series because they knew that too. They knew they needed Lowry for the conference finals.
Lowry versus Smart is not a matchup I'm looking forward to. I know we're going to talk about the matchups a little bit later on in the show, but at least for part of the game, that's going to be really
Lowry versus Smart versus whatever poor referee is closest. It's a whole lot of yelling at refs.
Yeah, don't put that whistle down. Yeah, there's a lot of flopping going on between those two, Smart in particular. It's going to be a disaster. And look, that's a huge factor. Like we saw this even against in Game 7 as we were watching it today. Like Grant Williams drew a lot of offensive fouls on Giannis Antetokounmpo because he's willing to hit the deck. And we saw that be a factor. Certainly Marcus Smart can do the same thing. There was a key swing play right before the end of the first half where Smart kind of threw his hands up, drew a foul on Antetokounmpo, and he was sort of in a shooting motion. He was awarded 3 free throws. And then from that point, Boston was able to continue to build their lead. So those kinds of things do matter.
It is going to be so much players swinging their arms back, grabbing their chins exaggeratingly. It's going to be a whole lot of that in the series. Yeah. Strap in.
Yeah. Not in a way you'd want to either. So we'll talk a little bit more about those matchups and get into some additional questions as Miami takes on the Boston Celtics on Tuesday. But before we do that, just wanted to tell you about the new sponsor of our show. Look, looking and feeling your best doesn't mean depriving yourself. Instead, you can choose joy and abundance. Sakara's organic, plant-rich, transformational nutrition programs are designed to help you cultivate body intelligence, so you can nourish your body and experience the results you want. Sakara is a wellness company anchored in food as medicine, on a mission to nourish your body through the power of plants. Sakara gives you the tools you need to transform your life with their organic, ready-to-eat meal delivery program and functional wellness essentials. Look, they're a plant-based diet. As a longtime vegetarian, I can tell you, I know it's a challenge for people when I speak to a lot of my non-vegetarian friends. It's too hard to find what to eat. It's too hard to be able to go to the groceries, get things. As there are more and more prepped meal plans out there, Sakara is a new option for you. They deliver all the foods directly to you. You sign up for the plans that you want. You get everything delivered directly. And again, they provide the food that you need in order to maintain a healthier plant-based diet. So many people are curious about it, don't know how to go about it. This takes all the you can save all the curiosity without having to actually figure anything out because Sakara does all that for you. So go to sakara.com right now. And they're offering our listeners 20% off their first order when they go to sakara.com and you enter the code LOCKEDON20. That's SAKARA.com/LOCKEDON20 to get 20% off your first order at sakara.com/LOCKEDON20.
Thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast. Host Raphael Barlow from NBA Draft Junkies and the author of the NBA Big Board newsletter gives fans an in-depth look into the NBA draft. It's free. It's available wherever you get your podcast. Our next question, David, looking ahead to this Heat Celtics series. Who guards Jayson Tatum, who had such an incredible series against not just Milwaukee, but against the Brooklyn Nets in round one, has, become one of the biggest stars in the NBA, has sort of been elevated, tapped on the shoulder. Hey, you are now among the superstars. You are no longer outside of the top 10. You are now a top 10 guy. Some people have him in the top 5. We don't have to have that debate, but he's deserved all of the praise. He has deserved it, okay? He is that dude, and he is a problem. Who on Miami picks up that assignment?
It's really tough. On the surface, like you look at the series versus the Sixers, and it was kind of a no-brainer for PJ Tucker to start on Harden. One, because of the familiarity. One, to get Jimmy out of foul trouble. He had to stay onto other players and try to limit what they can do. Though I don't think they have a similar matchup for PJ Tucker in this time around. If you look at what Jaylen Brown can do, you look at what Jayson Tatum can do, and somebody needs to be able to apply that pressure. You look at Miami's starting lineup. You expect Lowry to probably be in there. Bam, of course, will be there. Alongside PJ, you're also going to get Max Strus. So of those 5 players, can you risk putting Jimmy on for the full game, for most of the game, to try and limit what he can do and to keep him out of foul trouble? I think the answer is yes. I think Jimmy starts off on Jayson Tatum. I think he winds up. Look, and this is still a team that's going to rely heavily on their switching defense. Having said that, I think Jimmy is going to take on the primary assignment of trying to limit what Tatum can do, and then you can put Strus on, Grant Williams.
Well, yeah, I mean, you made the point before we started recording that, and it was a good one. Like they were happy at the end of that series against Philly to put Strus on Tobias Harris and just sort of say, you know what, you want to run everything through Tobias Harris. Good luck. Go ahead. Good luck winning that way. I think that PJ Tucker does start on Jayson Tatum. I think that's the reason why they picked up PJ Tucker. They saw what PJ was able to do against Kevin Durant last year in the playoffs for Milwaukee. Tucker has guarded everybody from Jayson Tatum to Kevin Durant to James Harden to whoever during the regular season. I think they'll be happy with that. They'll say, you know what, this is why we added this guy. He doesn't have to do a whole lot offensively the way that Jimmy does. Because, again, you need Jimmy to go toe-to-toe scoring-wise with Jayson Tatum. I think you need Butler to have as much energy offensively than he had that he could possibly have. And so I could see them going with PJ on Tatum and then having Jimmy Butler slot onto one of the Williamses, whether it's Robert Williams if he's made available or Grant Williams.
Or on Jaylen Brown. I think that seems more likely, right? So you have Butler Jimmy on Jaylen Brown. Butler on Brown, Strus on Grant Williams if he starts, if he's available. Again, the update with Robert Williams was that he was available for Sunday's Game 7 versus Milwaukee, but I guess Ime Udoka didn't really need him. We don't know what his health is going to be like. He's going to miss some time because that reconstructed knee is going to be an issue, but he's going to be able to play at some point. So we don't know exactly what his timeline is going to be. It doesn't matter. Miami's going to adapt.
It is a little different if it's Robert Williams. I don't know how comfortable you are putting Max Strus on him, because that's a much bigger size advantage than the Grant Williams one, right? And so that's going to be
Miami doesn't have any other options. They're not going to start.
Well, I mean, and that kind of goes to the next thing too. Is like okay. So let's just do all of it. You got Bam on Al Horford. I think we both agree that that's probably given how much Al Horford is involved in Boston's offense. He's setting screens. He's facilitating from the high post, doing all these things. You want Bam involved there because, like you said, they're going to switch everything. That you want Bam available to switch onto. If it's an Al Horford, Jayson Tatum screen and roll, you want Bam available to switch onto Tatum there. I think either way, if it's Lowry, if it's Gabe Vincent, they slot onto Marcus Smart. That's kind of a no-brainer. I actually don't mind Strus on Jaylen Brown if they want to go in that direction. I think Jaylen Brown obviously is a very much more physical, bigger guy than Max Strus is, but I'm not really worried about what Jaylen Brown does off the dribble from like a creative standpoint. Like Jaylen Brown is pretty much like, all right, I'm going to shoot or I'm going to close this out, and he could do some things. He can get he's got good body control. He can get creative when he's around the basket, but he's not a guy that's like going to be crossing over and doing all these things. And I kind of feel like Strus, it's not an ideal matchup, but it's kind of, I think, the lesser of all the evils here.
We've seen Max get his hand caught in the cookie jar a lot, even in the series against.
He's going to have to be careful. That's for sure.
And while he may not be Duncan Robinson-esque necessarily in terms of getting foul calls on him,
Yeah.
I think I think Jimmy can take advantage of Brown's lack of ball handling, which isn't like a huge weakness necessarily, but it's one that even a primary defender, an elite defender like Jimmy Butler can take advantage of. So I could see a lot of opportunities there.
Are you
If
worried
he's
about Jimmy using up too much of that energy again on somebody like Jaylen Brown, or it's not the same versus like
I
a
don't
Tatum?
I don't think it's the same. I think he could handle the Brown matchup better. I don't want him. I don't want him kind of devoting half of his defensive awareness onto Grant Williams spotting up from the corner three, which is really the only threat you have to worry about when it comes to Grant Williams. And he's very good. We saw that in Game 7.
Yeah.
He had 7 of 18 3-point attempts, which is not likely to happen again.
It's
And yet it was
bananas.
a
That's what it
factor.
is.
But it is a factor, and we saw
Yes.
Tobias Harris get those corner shots against Miami because Miami's more willing to concede 3-point shots, and so we'll see a lot of those drive and kick opportunities from both Brown and Tatum as they're looking to swing it out. They're going to drive, see Bam or PJ Tucker or somebody else clogging up the lane, as Miami has been effective in doing so, and then all of a sudden you're going to have a wide open
Yeah,
Grant Williams there.
I kind of like Jimmy in that spot though. I because if he's able to sort of, you can't exactly play free safety. Like you're not ignoring Grant Williams or Robert Williams there, but if he's closer down by the corner and by the baseline, that's where we see Jimmy Butler jumping those passing lanes, mucking it up, using his body. I kind of like him in that position a little bit more, kind of playing off of those guys, which sounds crazy because like Grant Williams did just make 7 threes, but I think you start playing off of him a little bit and just dare and like, okay, like take them. See, you have another 7 out of 18 from 3-point game in your bag. Go for it. And if you do, you start to play up on him a little bit more. I think we'll see. I like Jimmy Butler on one of the Williamses, regardless, because it gets him more in the paint and kind of involved in that area on the court. But we're talking about these matchups. Everything's going to change so dramatically, basically as soon as the ball gets tipped. We know Eric Spoelstra is going to play a lot of different looks. I think we'll see plenty of zone in this series by both teams, by the way, but a lot by the Heat. I think, and we'll see them throw a lot of different looks at Tatum and everybody else. I think we'll see a lot of that. What's your next? What's our next question?
Well, I've got one here that I think a lot of Heat fans are considering, especially a point I brought up last week on our show with Rowan Nodkarni of Sports Illustrated. Duncan Robinson has had an effective career against his quote unquote hometown team, Boston Celtics, and I wonder, is this an opportunity for Duncan to get extended minutes? Because I'm not so sure that's likely to happen. Again, against the Milwaukee Bucks, maybe given their drop coverage and everything else, maybe he would have had more opportunities. More shots from beyond the perimeter, which is where he's most effective. But against the Celtics and their incredible defense, their switch-heavy defense, would they limit what Duncan can do, or can Duncan get an opportunity to beat the Celtics just as he has in the past? Like, he was a huge factor in the Eastern Conference Finals a couple of years ago in the Orlando bubble. What do you think? Do you think he gets an opportunity to play here?
I'm going to be honest with you, man. I have no idea. No idea. On one... I kind of feel like Duncan Robinson could be really useful in this series because he would sort of, if he's making threes, he does loosen up a lot of what Boston does. Right now, all of a sudden, if you're the Celtics, you have to react to every screen that Duncan Robinson comes around in such a major way that could free up guys like Jimmy and Bam. And if he's making those shots, it could be so important. It could be so important.
Yep.
But then again, like, you just hope that Max Strus does that, right? And that's sort of the trade-off that we've seen this whole time. And I think Victor Oladipo is going to be so big and so important potentially in this series that does he just get those minutes? And you're just like, look, I'm sorry, Duncan. It just is what it is. We need as many guys who can match up defensively as possible. And right now, that's just not him. And kind of going back to our earlier questions, they're going to need Tyler Herro. You're not benching Tyler Herro. You're not benching Max Strus. He's your starter. So maybe Duncan doesn't play. Maybe early in the series, it's something like we saw late in the Philadelphia series, is where you get him some early run and just see if he's got the hot hand. I could see that maybe being a play here.
Yeah.
I don't know, because another one of Miami's bigger strengths here compared to Boston is I think Miami's deeper. They have more playable guys than Boston
for sure.
does.
I was going to bring that point
up.
So
do they lean into that? Do they lean into that? Maybe that's something to get into on the other side of the break. But it's a fundamental question of how Eric Spoelstra at least approaches the beginning of this series.
Yeah, and look, we one of the things that we discussed when we were talking about Duncan's playing time is, like, if you're going to be giving him opportunities because you may count on him either in the Eastern Conference Finals or in the NBA Finals, if you're able to make it to that point, is to start bolstering his confidence, etc. We saw him get more minutes as the Sixers series progressed, presumably leading up to this point. Now you're here. maybe you can give him another opportunity. So I would not be shocked if he gets some playing time in game one, specifically to do what you're saying, to get his opportunity, to see whether or not he's hitting that shot. If he starts to feel that confidence a little bit, Eric Spoelstra made that point about this roster in general, and specifically I think about Duncan is like, you have a couple of guys on this roster that once they see those first shot or two fall down, they get a lot more confident. We saw it with Max Strus, certainly. I think if Duncan starts feeling it and he starts getting that kind of confidence, start to build and build and build throughout the course of the series, that changes how Boston defends this team and gives guys like Jimmy more opportunity to attack the basket and finish at the painted area, especially since they don't have a shot protector in the typical sense, because Al Horford's just not that player and never has been. But we will take a break now and talk a little bit about some of these other questions regarding Miami's matchup against the Boston Celtics starting on Tuesday. But before we do that, just want to tell you a little bit about Built Bar. Imagine dipping your fingers into that plastic tub of birthday cake frosting and then opening your eyes and realizing that it was only 150 calories and 16 grams of protein. That's what it's like to eat a birthday cake puff from Built. I just received my birthday cake puffs, and look, I've never tried anything like that before. They're available right now, and we can't promise that they'll be there tomorrow, so go get them today at Built.com. If you haven't tried the puffs, I'll let you in on a little secret. That's what friends do. A chocolate-covered marshmallow protein bar. Yeah, you heard me. Delicious flavored marshmallow covered in 100% real chocolate. You can make every day your birthday with Built's birthday cake puffs. Built has taken the delicious experience of biting into a fresh slice of birthday cake and robed it in 100% white chocolate and added sprinkles. It's perfect. Go to Built.com right now. Try all the delicious flavors available there. You can get a mixed box with all of your favorites, and believe me, you won't be disappointed. Go to Built.com. Use the promo code LOCK15. You get 15% off your order, but only if you go to Built.com and use the promo code LOCK15 for 15% off your next order of Built Bar. Thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Just a reminder that you can always reach us via email at lockedonheat@gmail.com or via Twitter using the hashtag AskLOHeat. Be sure to please, as always, subscribe to the show and leave a review. Believe me, we're just ramping things up just as the Heat are. Now that they are in the Eastern Conference Finals, we're in it for the long haul, bringing you the best coverage available. So make sure to subscribe to get that coverage as soon as we are done recording this show. You'll be notified of that on YouTube and wherever you get podcasts. But here we are asking questions about the big Miami Heat matchup in the Eastern Conference Finals versus the Boston Celtics. I kind of asked that last one before, and we were talking a little bit about Miami's depth situation there, and I think it's going to be a huge factor for Miami because you even look, they were without Robert Williams tonight against the Milwaukee Bucks in Game 7, but they really only played 3 guys off the bench for substantial minutes. That's Daniel Tice, of course, the guy who's going to balance out what Bam Adebayo can do. Derek White got some playing times there, and Peyton Pritchard got 17 minutes, mostly because of his floor spacing ability and mostly because this game was completely done by midway through the fourth quarter. I expect Miami's depth, to your point, to make a huge factor in Miami's favor.
Yeah.
Like they just have so many players to step up. You're talking about Duncan Robinson, who's helped beat these Celtics in the past. He may or may not even get playing time. Victor Oladipo certainly is going to get playing time. Dwayne Dedmon feels like a player who might not get as much just because Boston in general goes a little bit smaller. I guess a Dedmon-Tice matchup might be an interesting one, but I can't see him getting a lot of playing time. And given Boston's ability to draw fouls, you hope that Dedmon can at least stay off the foot, stay out of foul trouble, be a factor just as he was. But, again, versus the Sixers, versus the size of Joel Embiid or Paul Reed, you need somebody like Dedmon to step up. You don't necessarily have that. In Boston, Daniel Tice, not really a factor in the painted area. He's an okay rebounder. Mostly he stretches the floor from the three-point range at this point in his career. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I want to go back to something you said earlier. You mentioned that Daniel Tice sort of balances out what it is that Bam does. What did you mean by that?
That's a joke.
That was a joke. You meant it sarcastically. I was like, okay.
Remember that Athletic scout? There was a scout reporting for the Athletic. They compared Daniel Tice to Bam Adebayo, and it was, a wash. He said Daniel Tice, Adebayo,
that's a wash. Oh my God, I forgot all about that. That went right over my head.
Heat fans never forget that.
No, I think Eric Spoelstra has shown at least a propensity to try to play Dedmon against smaller lineups because he wants to see if that size advantage is indeed an advantage. So I think we see Dedmon early on, just like in that Philadelphia series. We saw Dedmon early on, and we saw the minutes sort of tail off And then it kind of got different when Joel Embiid got in the mix, but whatever. I think we see him early and then kind of feel it out and say, you know what, is PJ Tucker at the 5 a better lineup for us when Bam is off the floor than Dedmon in there? I think we'll see it. I don't know that the Heat will play 9 or 10 guys, but they could. They have 9 or 10 guys that they can play. They might even have 11 guys that they can play in this series, depending on what we think of Caleb Martin and how he matches up. But I don't think they'll play that many every single game, but I think Spo will try that many in this series, if that makes sense. Like, that's where the depth, like when we say that depth is an advantage, and I think it is. You look at what Boston has, and they only have like 3-4 guys maybe off the bench who they trust. Everybody else is like not a guy that they can put in a conference finals game, right?
Yeah, Aaron Nesmith isn't getting any playing time.
No, and that would be like the closest guy, and he's just not ready for that. And so, and it really depends on like, okay, like you're really gonna play Peyton Pritchard that many minutes? Like it worked against Milwaukee. I don't know if that works against Miami. We'll see. Daniel Tice, sort of same thing. I guess we'll see. Where Miami, they've got so many guys who they legitimately trust, I think, in this situation that can play minutes. But the depth will be an advantage in that they have options, right? Like, okay, does this game call for more three-point shooting? We can go to these guys. Does this game call for more of a defensive presence? All right, we're going to lean, Oladipo, Gabe Vincent, Caleb Martin, maybe, like those kind of guys. They just have to, like, it's more of a bullpen, I think, that Eric Spoelstra has versus sort of just your traditional bench where he's like, all right, this is what we need against this game. Boston's got right-handed hitters. We need this guy. Like you can kind of just approach it that way. And I think that Eric Spoelstra will. The one thing about Spo that's so different from what Mike Budenholzer does from a coach, like Budenholzer, one of his strengths is how stable he is in his approach, right? But it's also one of his biggest weaknesses that he does not veer much off of what he wants to do from his system. He has his system and he doesn't change it at all, ever, no matter what. When you have Giannis, it's not as big of a problem, but it's a reason why he got fired from that Atlanta job, right? With Spo, he's very much the opposite. He's just sort of like, I don't care what it takes to make the sausage. I'm making the sausage. And you're not going to like what it looks like, how it's getting made, but we're going to win this series. And that's more of Spo's approach. And he has a system there. There's fundamental things in practices in place that Miami wants to do, right? Like the ball movement stuff, all that stuff is fundamental, but he's willing to change different looks. He's willing to change different things schematically. He's willing to change it personnel wise. He's willing to change it, whatever it takes to win a series. That's going to be a very different thing than what Boston just saw in this Bucks series.
I think we've got time for a couple more questions if we keep them quick.
Some quick ones, yeah.
How do you think Bam's defense is going to evolve in this series? That's something that I'm curious about. I know we talked about how Bam's going to play off of Horford to some degree because, he's not exactly going to be drawing him as much as Embiid did in the previous series. But do you think there's another level for Bam to reach, particularly when you have such heavy wing play in Tatum and Brown who could really carry the Celtics to a victory?
I don't know that there's another level that Bam can reach. I think he's been just that good defensively this season and in these playoffs. I do think that there's another level that his reputation can reach in these playoffs.
Will he be inspired by Marcus Smart winning DPOY?
Yes.
He's the kind, right? He'll take that personally.
That matters. Yep. He's going to want to be the best defender on the floor. Yep. 100%.
No. Well, he's not going to want it. He's going to be the best defender on the floor.
Okay, and he's also going to want to be. Yeah.
I've heard people already saying Grant Williams and the job that he did on Giannis, which was fairly effective, to some degree. Like he's the best defender now. Like, it's like how many best defenders do you have? Like Robert Williams was getting consideration for it.
Oh, don't even get me started on this. Yeah. I already said like they've already got Grant Williams as the best defender on the team. I was like the Marcus Smart PR machine better get out ahead of this because this is not good for his image or his brand. Look, Bam is going to be as important as anybody else in this series, right? They are going to dare Bam to switch because that's not because they're targeting Bam, but just because of how Boston operates. That's their offense. They're going to move around a lot. It's a really good team. There's a lot of similarities, right? Both of these teams like to play at a slow pace. They both like to switch everything. They're both really well coached. Everything is like drive and kick offensively for both of these teams, right? They like swing, drive, kick. That's the offense. The difference is that Boston has Jayson Tatum and Miami has Bam Adebayo. And those are really the differences. And it's going to be very like Bam Adebayo has to make his imprint on this series. He has
He
to.
will. He
Jimmy
will.
Butler has to go toe-to-toe with Jayson Tatum from a scoring perspective, but Bam Adebayo has to be the second best player in this series for the Heat to have any chance of winning it.
All right. You got a question?
No, that was all the ones I had. Oh, I have one more. Can the Heat limit Boston's three-point shooting? Because they're spamming the three-point line all playoffs long, especially against Milwaukee, but they were doing it against Brooklyn. Brooklyn and Milwaukee do give up a lot of threes. Milwaukee on purpose, Brooklyn because they stink on defense, but they're taking basically 14 3 or making, they're making 14 threes a game almost in these playoffs, which is an absurd number. Can Miami limit that? I think is going to be a big, kind of battleground in this series. Can Miami's 3-point percentage get back up to what we're used to seeing after some duds in Philadelphia? Is going to be huge. And then can you kind of limit the looks that Boston is getting on the perimeter?
I think they can. A big part of that was, a big part of that will be Bam's ability to switch. Like, I mean, they took 55 3-pointers against the Bucks today. Obviously, a little bit of an aberration there, but yet that's mostly their game plan. I get to your point. The Bucks do wind up giving up a lot of threes, not usually 55 of them.
Right.
But I think given PJ Tucker's ability to stay with, either one of Tatum or Brown, and certainly to be able to cover Grant Williams if he's out there, I think Bam's ability to do so as well makes things very differently. When you've got Brook Lopez in drop, but he's not able to close out on those 3-point shots, I think that changes things in Boston's favor.
Yeah,
Miami isn't that type of defense unless they take advantage of those minutes when Dedmon's on the floor. But even to some degree, I think he'll be more effective than Lopez as far as being able to hedge a little bit on those 3-point opportunities. So I'm curious to see.
I think they're going to. I think they're going to run as many shooters off the line as possible. I think Miami is going to look at almost, what was that, game 1, where Milwaukee just crushed Boston because they were just way more physical. And give credit to the Celtics. They raised their game. They met that moment, and they met the physicality of Boston. But I do think Miami's going to try to test that again. They say, okay, you dealt with that version of physicality from the Bucks. Here's our version of physicality. I don't know which team is more physical, right? Between obviously Giannis is the most physical player in the NBA, but outside of him, like, Miami comes at you, man. Like the Heat, I could see them just trying to run everything off of the 3-point line and getting that game played in the paint as much as possible. As much as Boston wants to get into the paint, and they do, I could see Miami being like, all right, come into the paint. Welcome. Like, we're going to muck it up here. It's going to get rough. It's going to get physical. You just did this for a whole series. Can you do it for a whole other series? Because we're confident that we can. I could see that being the Heat's approach, but we'll see.
It's going to be a great series. And of course, again, we'll bring you all the coverage available, as soon as we can. We'll be recording after every episode. We'll be after every game. We'll be at the FTX Arena. We'll get you everything you need to know to keep you informed as Miami takes on the Boston Celtics during the Eastern Conference Finals as they continue their trek to a potential championship. In any case, thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make your second listen Locked On NBA from the first jump ball of the play-in tournament to the last possession of the NBA Finals. Locked On experts take you deep inside the playoffs with insight and analysis affecting all 30 teams. This is David Ramil signing off for now. Thanks so much for joining me, Wes.
Wrap it up, B.